Welcome back to Media7. In journalism, we habitually refer to news reports as stories, and a particularly good news report as a great yarn. But The Truth Game, a play running this month at Dunedin's Fortune Theatre, is a story in the conventional fictional sense, albeit one based on years spent in the news business by its author, Otago Daily Times Deputy Editor Simon Cunliffe. This is how it looks.
I'm the editor, right? I decide, not you, not them, not the branch manager. Acting editor. Right. The future is the truth. That's what we do. Well, that's our job. Publishing the truth. The truth is that the future is going to kill all of us. All of us.
If there's any problems, I don't want to know about.
I'm joined now by Simon Cunliffe. Welcome, Simon. Now,
thank you very much.
I have to say, I have never seen a location trailer for a stage play before, and it works brilliantly. Whose idea was that?
That was the idea of the artistic director of the Fortune Theatre, Lara McGregor, and her team, and they put that together on a shoestring, as they do, and I agree. It's not exactly the feel of the actual production, but it sort of certainly gives an idea of what we're on about.
And it is the actual ODT offices?
It is set in the ODT offices. The ODT has been terrific in supporting this production. Yeah. So yes, it is in the ODT offices.
Now, if I worked with you and you wrote a play about a bunch of characters in a newsroom, I'd be asking you which one is me.
And a number of people have asked me that, Russell, you won't be surprised to hear. My standard defence to that is that it was actually written before I joined the ODT in 2007, or at least the first draft of it was written. I have to say that there are a few really good lines that I have subsequently put into the script that come from the ODT. The truth is that this is fiction. It is haunted by the ghosts of numerous people over many years in different circumstances and anecdotes and what have you, but it's not about anyone in particular. It's in fact about all the journalists I've ever worked with and about none of them.
Which actually is almost the same answer that Richard Langston gave when he was asked about his book of poems, that also written while he was at the ODT, that there are certain tropes within journalism. There are certain kinds of characters in newsrooms.
Absolutely, there are, and one of my favourites is the old editorial writer who wanders around in a bit of a daze, and it's a bit of in the play at least, it's a bit of a Shakespearean jester, but who from time to time has these piercing insights and delivers the profound truths of the matter.
Now, the play isn't just about the characters. It is about the somewhat perilous time for newspapers that we're in at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think, while to paraphrase Mark Twain, the death of newspapers may have been greatly exaggerated and certainly prematurely exaggerated. I don't think anyone would pretend that print journalism in particular has gone through some fairly tricky times in recent years. If you look to the States, for instance, I think in 2008 the average share price of the American newspaper company fell by about 83%. Major companies, major titles like the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, Philadelphia Inquirer, numerous other newspapers went into bankruptcy. That hasn't happened here, but we face the same sort of pressures, and those pressures are partly to do with the onset of the internet, coinciding with the economic crisis and the downturn, falling circulation, falling ad revenues, a sort of perfect storm, if you like, and that has had its impact on certainly print journalism in the country.
The interesting thing is that all those American papers you mentioned were acquired into large chains which kind of collapsed collectively. You work for an independent newspaper, the most prominent independent newspaper in the country. How is that different?
Well, yes, I work for the Otago Daily Times, and it is the last remaining major independent newspaper, privately owned newspaper in New Zealand. What happened in the United States, and I think in Great Britain to a certain extent as well, is that you had a lot of privately owned newspapers in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who were making generous profits, 20, 30% returns, and were acquired by great newspaper chains. Now, unfortunately for those chains, those acquisitions often coincided with not only the economic downturn, but the rise of the internet and new media, blogging, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And we find ourselves in a situation now where that process continues apace. Of course, we all now, in newspapers, we all have an internet presence, we all have online sites and what have you, but that has, I think, in some ways affected the way we work.
And yet one of the reviewers of the play came out of it declaring that you were an optimist for the future of newspapers. But was that reviewer right?
Well, that reviewer had a point. I am optimistic, certainly about mastheads, rather than necessarily the print product. I am very affectionate towards and attached to the print newspaper, as many people my generation are. And I think the form dictates certain things that I think are necessary and are held dear to many people, including, a certain focus on grammatical standards and truth and all that sort of stuff. But mastheads. Good journalism will survive, and it will probably cohere around certain mastheads that have reputations for standards, reputations for veracity, for telling the truth, for investigative journalism, etc. At the ODT, I know that we're occasionally sniffed at by various people, but our strength is our local journalism, being connected to the community, and also reporting on local events, and those are the sorts of things you don't easily find on the internet. On international news you can find from a number of sources, national news to a certain extent as well. So that's one of the strengths, and that's one of the things that will keep local mastheads alive.
And for all the talk about hyper-localism, I think you're quite right about that, and I think mastheads still matter. Simon Cunliffe, thank you. And thanks also to Nicholas Hanson and to you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.